Welcome to New South Wales State Archives and our webinar on New South Wales occupations. I'm going to give you an overview of how we're approaching today's webinar. I'm going to just have two sections. The first one is I'm going to show you how do you find records relating to occupations and give you a how-to manual. And then in part two, I'm going to give you a sample of all the many different types of occupation records that we have. I can't give you a listing of all of them, but we will be seeing a wide-ranging sample. And by the end of the webinar, I hope to give you a sense of can-do and give you a sense of inspiration to give it a go. So step part one is how to find the records. First place to start, as with all family history and all research, is your own stories, your own family stories. Do you know somebody who perhaps worked in the public service or for the New South Wales government, or did they work in a field where they would need to be licensed or registered? And particularly, did they work as a public servant? These are the sorts of triggers that can lead to occupation research. These are the kinds of jobs that would need licensing. You've got medical practitioners and dentists, chemists, accountants, architects, miners, publicans, hawkers licenses and so forth, coach licenses, squatters and graziers, and mercantile marine. So where do you look? That's the thing to start with. A lot of occupation records will come to you as you're doing other research, so we're going to start there. Arrival records have a record of the occupation right there under trade. So you can see that different occupations are listed there for you. Dressmaker, I see, carpenter, and so forth. Census records can give you that information as well. In this case, there's a very clear listing of few occupations, and you can see that there's different occupations there: storekeeper, matron, labourer, stockman, quarryman, and so forth. So these are listings that you can find in your general research. Colonial secretary is always a resource to start with or to use when you're doing family history. And in this case, we've seen a reference to Jane Sims proposing to open a school for females. It leads through to this being the last page of her memorial, and it talks about her wanting to start a school for females in the neighbourhood of Liverpool. She's also listed Reverend Samuel Marsden as her referee. You can also see listings for occupations in things such as court and jail records, electoral rolls, directories and gazettes. The first example I'm showing you is from a register of artificers and other labourers assigned that was under the Superintendent of Convicts. You can find this reference by looking at the guide, the convict guide. If you look at the right-hand side of the screen, I've arranged today's webinar where I'm going to show you examples on the left, and on the right-hand side I'm going to show you all the clues and what might lead you to this sort of information. So in this case, I'm teaching you the basics. You can search by name at the top. Underneath, I show you where I found that reference, and underneath that is where I found this reference to go to. In this case, it's the convict guide. This is an example from the Education Gazette. You can find this in our collection search, and on the left-hand side, I've shown you a result from collection search, and it gives you a listing of all the different gazettes. And on the right-hand side, I've shown you that it lists out transfers and appointments of inspectors. So that's a good resource for people who are doing teaching as well. Now, where can I look? Public service is going to be a very good source. So we go there next. This is from the microfiche, for those of you who've done this in the past, and it gives you a listing in the blue books of the different public service divisions, and it should give you a listing of public service in those divisions. We have those indexes going right back to the beginning. You can also now, though, search this on the New South Wales Government Gazette on Live, on Trove. You can also search for this, the appointments, transfers and promotions from different agencies. And in the example I've put on the screen for you, it's the Department of Mines, and it shows you that so-and-so, Ashley Woodlands, has been selected to be a registered surveyor, and Mr. Antos is a registered surveyor to be a mining surveyor. So you can see these sorts of things doing all of your standard family history. We come to our main finding aids now. Online indexes is on our main page. And when you go through to online indexes, you can see a wide range of occupations. I've made a list for you today: attorneys and barristers, and bankruptcies, and business, and chemists, and firms, and nurses, and pharmacists, police, publicans, and railway workers and teachers at the current time. Always look in Colonial Secretary. And in Colonial Secretary, we can see reference to employment in the convicts, under convicts, convict employment there. And for those of you who are interested in convict employment and assignments, this is one place to look. We also have mechanics and tradesmen listed as well. On the right-hand side, you can see I found that in the Colonial Secretary's Index online. Finally, and very importantly, is our records A to Z. Our website is currently designed to be mined, and this is how you go in. There's two spots you can choose, and once you go in, there's access to all of these sorts of guides: accountants, architects, attorneys, bankruptcies, and so forth, firefighters, railways. I won't read the list out, but as you can see, there's a wide range of listings by occupation that you can access. And so for any occupation I'm not going to be showing you today, don't forget, you can go back to Records A to Z and it's all there for you. This is an example of the Records A to Z page, listed alphabetically by subjects. Now I'm just going to show you one to give you a little sense of how you do this. You just click on Accountants and you get a listing of information. Now most of the information when it comes to occupations will come under some sort of legislation. You can see there, this one is from 1945. And there's going to be some sort of a need to make a record, you know, for the list of people who are qualified or for other reasons. If you go further down the page, it gives you a listing of the main series of records. So all of our guides will follow this format in general. Some will be bigger than others. Now, if this was your page, on the right-hand side, you can see the years, that the coverage of the records. Always look for the years and the dates, because that will tell you if it's relevant to the person you're researching. On the left-hand side and across, we have our registered information. We've got a series number, which is like the key to the lock. Once you have the series number, you've always got a record of what you saw and what you're looking at. On the right-hand side, we have a listing of what it is, which in this case is the Register of Registered Public Accountants. So if we just click on the NRS 12271, it takes us to more information. And always click Read More. It'll give you a listing of what we have. It tells you what it covers. For example, in this case, it's a form of a card which provides the name and qualifications of the person registered and the address of his or her registered office. Now, in this case, it shows you some items that are actually available in our reading room. So they're not online. It's 6/12931 up to 40, 10 volumes. So that's an interesting question for someone who's doing research, because if you go into our reading room, you can see a listing right there of all 10 volumes, and we can see clearly now that they're alphabetical. In terms of records that have names attached, they can quite often be alphabetical, but in some cases they're by date. Now in this case, I'm just choosing the first item purely at random, and I'm going to show you that item, and that's it there. And if we open it, we get through to John Arthur Ayery, registered under Section 19, residential address, registered office. And there's the payoff for the person who's doing research in the reading room. If we go back to our finding aids, under Records A to Z, you've got Professions and Occupations, which is going to take you through to a large cross-section of our records relating to occupation. You can also see the links on the right-hand side as you go down the page for different reasons. And it takes you through to this page. Now, this page literally will be the opening starting point for many of you when you're doing research into different forms of public service. You can see the listing of jobs there. Any one of those guides will take you through to something along the lines of what I showed you with the accountant's page. Now, there are the final options are, we've got only a handful of named indexes attached to collection search, but it does work for doctors. So that is actually a very interesting exception. So you can write the name of the person, George Brownlow Downs, doctor, and it will lead you through to a photograph that you can see online. It's a work in progress. Some of them are only available in our reading room at the current time, but in time they will all be online for you to see from your home. I'll talk more about the doctor's photographs when we get to that section in A to Z. Advanced search, although not for the faint of heart, it is actually the most powerful tool you have for drilling down into an archive. And if you notice at the top in advanced search, I've ticked on series. Then I've put under title employment. You could also use other keywords like staff, register, or something along those lines to unlock records that may come through as for occupation. And if you look down the page, you can see all sorts of employment records, one for Darlinghurst Jail, one for the Council of Education, and so forth. Another way, it can lead to records precisely for registers of employees, such as this one under the Department of Primary Industries. So this is the kind of research that you can do once you build up your confidence and start using advanced search. So to sum up phase one of our talk today, searching by name, if you know his name, you can go through the online indexes or collection search. Collection search currently works for doctors, it does work for companies, and it can work if you go into advanced search with agencies such as Department of Education or somewhere else. The other way to search is if you know the occupation. I know she was a doctor. You can go into research A to Z. You can then drill down to doctors or another occupation and find out what we have and what years they cover. We also have the professions and occupations page, and that should also take you through to different occupations. And at the moment, collection search is the only one that will list out occupations by name of the person. So to answer the question I sort of posed at the beginning of the talk, how do I find records? It's by name or occupation. In preparing today's webinar, it was a little bit like, how long is a piece of string? Because if I was to sit here and to give you an example of everything we have, I could go forever and ever. I could even just do one occupation in a talk like this. But today, what I'm going to do is give you a wide range and a sense of some of the most used ones. And by the time we've seen the record occupations A to Z, I hope to have given you a sense of the different types of records and the sorts of payoff for your research. So the first thing I want to start with is access. It's actually not very clear for the new researcher. So on the left-hand side, just a few samples. Health personnel files are closed for 100 years, which is the longest. You've got corrective services are closed for 70 years, and so forth, all the way through to police and 30 years since separation, and public servants for 30 years. The average person who's doing research doesn't need to worry too much about that, because if it's listed in an online guides, it will generally be open. It will be open. And if there's any confusion whatsoever, I strongly recommend you talk to us, because that's what we do. We give you quality advice and we understand what you can and can't access, and there will be no issues. And for those of you who are advanced researchers, you can actually look for this yourself by going for access directions in collection search. And if once you, by searching the website, and once you find this page, it actually lists out all the different agencies, and you can check whatever agency is interesting to you. But remember, there's no need to master that. You can just ask advice. So let's begin the examples. This is an example from very early on. It's from the Indentures of Apprenticeships for the Male Orphan School in the 1820s. And it's an example of a registration for an apprentice. It gives the name, it gives witnesses, it gives the age, it gives the location, and so forth. So as with all, generally speaking, with all occupation records, you're going to get a series of details along those lines. And if you look at the right-hand side again, you can see I got that from the Childcare Index, which is online and freely available. This is an example from architects. This is something that you're only going to find if you put some research in the reading room, but it's a good example of the kinds of registers that have been kept. You've got a list of the architects on the left-hand side, and there you've got a listing down the right-hand side of where they're working and their qualifications, which is an interesting tell, because that is really one of the reasons that these registers were kept, because they wanted to keep the details of who was registered, when they were registered, and how they were registered, for obvious reasons, so that we have qualified people working as architects. Asylum records, we do have, not for all asylums, but we do have for underneath the asylums, we do have registers of staff, and this is a good example of one. And if you look across the page, you can see the rank, you can see the name, you can see the period that they were registered, and the pay that they were getting as well, and the date of their first employment. Barristers, this is from an oath of allegiance, as you can see, and you can see a "So help me God" in the middle of the page, and a date at the top on the stamp. This is something that you can access if you do research in the reading room, in the volume on the right-hand side. It's all available. If you're wondering how these records are found, it's all available through Records A to Z. Company packets are listed in collection search, and it's for the period 1875 to 1975. But generally speaking, they are the companies that are dead. We call them the dead companies indexes. And essentially, if a company is still in action, you won't find them in archives, but if the company is officially out of business, you might find them. This is an example of a Brookland Speedway Limited. They were going to build a speedway near the archives here, and thankfully for all researchers in the reading room, they never went through with it. But as you can see here, it gives the names of the shareholders, it gives the cushion names, the address, the occupations, the amount of money that they've declared, and so forth. You can find other varieties of records in there as well. You can summary of shareholders, registered address of the company, mortgages and details of liquidation, and a history sheet of administration action taken in respect to the company as well. Something to remember when it comes to business records in general is that not all records will be followed through into our archives. So it's not something where we will always have the outcome. So this is a significant resource for you, the Noel Butlin archives, because they actually collect business records that are not archived elsewhere. So that's a place to contact if you're serious about your research into a business. This is an example from an earlier time. It's the Registration of Firms Act 1902, and this one is from 1903. And you can see that it's a good example of what you will see in the books that you can access in the reading room, and it gives a list of the details of the business and of the people who are involved, who are running the business, and so forth, and a spot there for remarks. Another example from the same series. They're fairly basic. One of the interesting things about this is that you can find them quite easily in our finding aids in business and company records, but this is the payoff. This is the part that if you ever were to look at the record in the reading room, this is what you'll see. They can vary a little bit in depth too. Something to remember about business, of course, is that they don't always work out, and some of the better businesses will end up in bankruptcy or insolvency, and we have indexes for those. So quite often you can go through to quite a lot of records around that business in the bankruptcy or insolvency files, and they're part of our mainstream collection, and you can find them in indexes online. Just a bit of an example of the sort of jobs that you'll find in there. There are many though, there's far too many for a list. Now this is just one from the earlier times, memorials to the governor. It's for the castrator of cows in the official herds. That one was found under memorials to the governor. Coach licenses. Now you can find licenses of different types underneath Register of Applications in different petty sessions. It's a series that doesn't get looked at very often from my perspective in the reading room, but can have a payoff because many different sorts of records will be found there for different sorts of licenses. We have auctioneers, we have coach carriage drivers, we have hawkers, people who go around from place to place buying and selling. One of the things to remember about hawkers is quite often you'll find naturalised people who were naturalised or weren't naturalised, should I say, they won't be able to own land, and so generally speaking, they were encouraged to be hawkers because they can move around in their place of employment. So quite often, for a naturalisation case, this is actually a resource that is well worth looking at. Different petty sessions, which can be found in our finding aids. This one is actually a record for dairymen. And you can see that it has a lot of interesting information. On the left-hand side, you have the actual names of the person involved and their details. But on the right-hand side, you can actually see tallies of cows being milked and how many are dry. So you go down to that extra detail in this record, and that's a very good outcome for someone doing research. Remember, if something like this is of interest to you, just drill down in records A to Z and you can find these sorts of things. Dentists. Another fairly typical record of the type. You've got the name, you've got the address, and you've got the qualifications. So clearly this record was about maintaining a list of qualified dentists. This is an example of that series that I did show you from in the opening. You can actually just write the name of a doctor and you can go through to their photographs. One of the interesting things is that they are actually there to show the qualification of the person. So we have a photograph here of a person who's now qualified in a qualification gown, but you can also see a signature, and most of them will have that signature. I'm going to show you a handful more just to give you a little sense of what is available under this series, and you can see signatures on the first two. And one more, just for fun. This man is Lancelot John Hunter. I couldn't resist showing you that one today for a Lancelot on a horse. Further records of doctors that are available, you can access them in the Government Gazette, which you can freely research on Trove. This is an example. It's a register of medical practitioners giving their qualifications and their address and their names and their dates. Gold miners. Now, I don't want to mislead people when it comes to gold mining records. It's one of the things about the history of gold mining is that the miners' rights were given to the miners, so they are not held in government archives. And if they were to be found, it would be extremely exceptional. I don't know of one at this time. But what we do have is registered of auriferous licenses, and this is a really good example of what you can access through our online indexes, and then come into the reading room and have a look. And as you can see, it has got a lot of detail based on the mining. It gives you a little diagram of the mining location and a series of dates. So it actually is extremely pithy in regards to information that you can access from this source. And from the point of view of an archivist who works in the reading room, I'd like to see them used more often because I think it's a fantastic thing to have a look at. And they're also quite large in terms of their size, big volumes. Lots of fun to be had there. This is just a few more examples of licenses. Hawkers and auctioneers in the Petty Sessions records. We're now down to nurses. And this is the Register of General Nurses. Under the Nurses Registration Act, the board was responsible for the administration of examinations and certificates. So this is the kind of records we're going to have. We've got the name, the hospital they were trained at, the certificate number, the date they were registered, the records number, and also remarks where they seem to be listing the section there of the Act, I think. Now this is an unusual series, but I wanted to show you today that this is the kind of treasures that do come up in archives research. It's from NRS 10859, Certificates of Registration, Miscellaneous Certificates. So this is not something that's going to pay off in every case, but it is something we hold and you can access in the reading room if you're curious. Do notice though that it does cover the period 1912 to 1956. So I imagine there'd be a lot of people interested in having a look through that box. A record of pharmacists, which follows the same pattern as you've seen already. It's on the left-hand side, the number of certificate, the date of the examination, the name, the address, and what act a qualification comes under. It's also available on online indexes. So you can find the record in terms of what we have, and you can come to the reading room to have a look. This is a photograph that was taken as photographs of pharmacists, 1907 to 1917. So I thought it was important to at least let you know that these exist. They were accumulated by the New South Wales Board of Pharmacists, and they're associated with the board's role in keeping records of people registering as pharmacists. In a sense, they wanted to make sure who was the one that was registered. Police have a good register. I have a series of good registers actually, and this is just one that is available from our online indexes. It has a copy service attached, so many of you may have already used this, and this is the sort of records you get. It's a listing of all the essential bits of information. You get the date of birth, you get a description, the eyes, the hair, the complexion, where they're from, calling, religion, and so forth. And on the right-hand side, you can see a series of dismissed, discharged, and resigns. One of the things, I will go back one page, one of the things with police records in general is that there is a wide range of records. I recommend everybody who is researching occupations, look in the records A to Z, study it carefully because it will provide you with a list far longer than I'm able to give you today. And in terms of police, there are many interesting records that don't get accessed, and that's a sign that people haven't realised they're there yet, and I'm trying to help you with that. The Registers of Police Online provides you with this. On the left-hand side, you can see a little box. So if ever you see a box on the left-hand side, it actually means that we can order a copy. This is an example of a series that starts in approximately 1907 and goes through to at least the 1960s and 70s. And it's one of the better payoffs for police servicemen. It gives you, again, basic details, when they were promoted, what happened. It occasionally will give you reprimands and so forth, when they're discharged. And And so in a sense, you get a sense of the whole history of the person in the occupation just from a card. It's one of the better payoffs when you're doing occupation research. Not always available, but available in many key cases, including police service cards. This is another example. You can see that the gentleman got a Stillwater and Surf Bronze medallion and died while in the police force. Prison warders. Again, it's very typical of the run of occupation records, where you get the date of appointment and so forth, date of birth, height, colour of hair, and so forth, and complexion. If there's going to be a remark, it's mostly going to be about transfers and retirement. Publicans licenses is one of the more hectic series of records because the format for the records will change quite a bit. So I'm going to put a few slides into teaching you about publicans licenses. The easy place to start, though, is always the indexes online, and you can see it there with the publicans licenses index. It covers 1830 to 1861 with a small gap between 49 and 52. So that's an easy in. You can find this, and this is the payoff when you go into our reading room to look at the reel. Gives the name, and gives the place, gives the date, and so forth. Certificate of the above, being a person to be able to keep a public house, and so forth. Now, but one of the interesting things, though, when I get asked questions about publicans licenses, I never move forward without looking at the publicans licenses guide myself, because it changes so much over time. So I do recommend for anybody doing research into the publicans licenses, you go to the guide. This is an example of a guide. You get a historical overview. And for the serious researcher, that does explain why things keep changing in these sorts of records. And in this case, it leads to these three different periods of time. On the left-hand side, you can see they're very early, 1830 through to 1887 at the latest. I see one goes up to 82, which is Colsec. The second batch covers that sort of central period up to 1910, 1849 to 1910. And by 1884, they weren't creating those lists. So we now move into government gazettes is where you're likely to find them. There are lists of government gazette licensed people in our collection, but because it's in so many different places, I do recommend that you match your research to the guide, which this is just a quick demonstration of the sort of detail you can find when you go to a guide. Public service is something that where we have lots of records, and they can be accessed here in our reading room. There's a wide range of records under the Public Service Board. This is the employees' history cards. As purely as an observation, they don't get access very often. So I think this is a question I'd like to hear all my webinar attendees asking. If you have someone who you think might be a public servant, go to the desk and ask about it, because in the reading room, we can access this series. And as you can see, once you get through to it, it's extremely detailed. You get a lot of information. You get the emoluments, the pay, the salary allowance, the dates, the date of gazette number, and any sort of other things that change. I see this one, granted leave for duration of the war from 1940. Also exams passed on the right-hand side. So it's actually one of the better payoffs in terms of cards that you can access with occupations research. Here's another example just to show you that one's not a fluke. Has the same sorts of details. Also granted leave for the duration of the war, which is part of the family history. Resigned, accepted, without fault. Interesting down the bottom. Public service also listed in government gazettes, and also we also have the blue books. I gave you a little sample of the blue book on the right hand side because as you can see, they are actually blue. But what you're going to get with this is you're going to get a listing of the employees at a particular time. So you have the first appointment to service, you have the appointment to the present position, their current salary. So the sort of person that can go through the public service list, if you go through it every year, you can actually track the career of a person. This can be done on Ancestry now and also on microfiche in our reading room, but Ancestry will do it quite easily for you. And this is the kind of information that you can gain. You can see that the majority of this page is the Public Library of New South Wales. I'll pass on that one and go to the next one. We're now moving on into railways, another series that's extremely important because the amount of people who are employed by the railways is huge, and also all over the state in terms of location. So this is a record that goes into your local area more often than many. This one is the earliest one that we have, one of the earliest ones, the Register of Salaried Officers 1856 to 1917. And as you can see, it's really just a list of notes. They didn't anticipate that it would have to be put up on a display today. So you can see things that are crossed out. You can see things that are just jotted down, pay changes and so forth. It's a lighter version of the career card. That's a series that you can access in our online indexes, and purely by observation, it doesn't go into the reading room very often. This series goes into the reading room very regularly. It's our main series of personal history cards. You can also order it online from home, and we will send a copy to you. The interesting thing about the career cards in this case is they were kept as part of the superannuation system. So what that means is that sometimes there won't be an outcome. And that means that person most likely wasn't in the superannuation system. But in the case of Joseph Benedict Chifley, who the historians of my audience will realise was a Prime Minister of Australia in the 1950s, you can actually track through where he was based, which is Bathurst in his career, and what his pay was at different stages. So you can get a sense of his rise in rank, or perhaps not. Sometimes they don't. Now, in this case, if you look down, he was dismissed by proclamation and left work on strike. That was the great 1917 strike, which you can research at another time. But one of the interesting things about that strike is that only the best ones were ever re-employed. And in this case, Mr. Chifley was. And what's interesting if you look down the page is that you can see that he swaps driver to fireman to driver to fireman to driver to fireman. Yeah, I've had audiences in the past when I've done talks surmise that might be they were sharing the pay. But I'll leave that to your imagination. It's the kind of question that a researcher would want to ask. On the right-hand side, you can see in the remarks, it's going to be very interesting in the case of Mr. Chifley because he was a career politician. So he takes leave on full pay after 20 years service to go and start contesting elections. And turns out he did okay because he became Prime Minister of Australia. There's a second page to this card. Oftentimes cards will have a flip side. And you can see he resigned finally in 1928. I notice in the remarks there's a transfer to the super board, so I imagine that's where his super was sent. Another example, just so you can see that wasn't a one-off, and an entirely different set of information. You've got a gatekeeper in this case, and where they were stationed, what branch they were in, their pay, and then all sorts of things. There's a birth certificate was seen on the right-hand side in the right-hand corner down the bottom, and it gives a birth date, place of birth. So it can be quite an interesting thing looking at career cards. It's one of the better payoffs you will ever get in occupations research. And with railways, you can actually order it from anywhere you are in the state, and if we find a card, we will send it to you. Now, I oftentimes have to explain to people in the reading room that when they don't find a card, there are actually other options. And one of the interesting options is this page. They used to publish in the government gazettes every 3 years all the people who are in the railways. And what that tells me as a person supporting other people doing research is that you can track through the votes and proceedings in government gazettes and you can create your own career card. So if they weren't in the super system, this is an extremely good second plan, but it just takes a little bit of time. But fortunately these days you can access this period completely on Trove, and you can do that on Trove from your home this afternoon. One of the interesting side points of this is this system of publishing in the government gazettes ceased around the time of World War II when there was a shortage of paper. Another example, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of a closer view. You can see the occupation, what their pay was at the time of the publication and where they were based. So it's a very interesting way to do research if you don't get access to the card, where you can actually get access to possibly just as much information if you're willing to do some of the work yourself online. Now, this is just a list of, there are other series that we have. They don't get access very often because people don't know about them. So one of the reasons I made a point of it today, you can see the majority there are still R series, and they are R series because they haven't been transferred into archives, and they will be in due course. So if any of that interests you for whatever reason, such as the Wagga Wagga record or the Newcastle record, just feel free to talk to an archivist and we can show you how to access that series. It's quite easy to do with a little bit of advice. Now this is a listing for roll of solicitors from NRS 13664, and it gives it's very similar information to what you've seen before. So by this time I'm thinking my audience is very experienced. Teachers are listed here under teacher roles for the earlier period, 1869 to 1908, which is available in indexes online. And as you can see, just like the railways, it'll give you a series of listings of different movements. One of the words I've seen here is words like removed were in place of words like transfer that you and I would use today. Although I see on this one, 1899, she was transferred. Promotions, exams included. So in a sense, when you go to a career card, you get the history of the person. In this case, you actually saw her photograph earlier in the presentation. It's Elsie Jean Dayel. She actually did a career change into being a doctor, from teacher to doctor. Quite a hard achievement. Well done. This is just one more example, just to give you a little bit of perspective. I noticed that her marriage is there. Quite often in teacher records, they were asked to, if females who had got married were asked to resign. In this case, she wasn't. So that's, in some periods that was the case, in other periods it wasn't. From a slightly later period, this is something you can access in the reading room. These cards were created for teachers from approximately 1907. And you can access them in the reading room, just a similar sort of format to the railway cards. Classification, date of award, position, and so forth. This one is an unusual series. But it's in our collection, and with a little bit of drilling in records A to Z, this is the kind of gem that you can find. These are loose sheets giving details of teachers and officers of the department listed in the Australian Imperial Force in World War I. Although I noticed the dates go up to 1940. Information give rank, date of birth, place of education, details of service, death or demobilisation, subsequent employment until 1940. Now it's not available through the online indexes. This is the kind of thing where you'd have to identify the series and then go into the records and have a look. But this is the kind of payoff, and if you look through our online indexes and our records A to Z, there are other records of servicemen who were from a particular occupations. This is only an example. An interesting thing with teacher records is that you can actually get mention of teachers in the administration files for the schools. Now, many of you who are experienced family historians will have looked through school files, and they're all different. But my experience has been that when you're looking through schools that are smaller, you've got a very much higher chance of getting a record relating to a teacher or to a teaching issue. I've seen records relating to teachers who wanted horses so they could travel between different locations. I've seen complaints made about teachers, and a wide variety of records coming through as letters, and sometimes from the person in particular. So if you're researching teachers and you think they're in smaller schools, it is very much worth the look to look through the administration file. And on the larger schools, although it's possible, it's just a little bit less likely. The payoff won't be as high. From my experience, I've never regretted looking in a school file. That can be quite interesting. This is a record of Tramway as opposed to railways. They were actually merged with railways in terms of the records for a short period. And so there can be overlap, but this is just a register which gives the name, the position, the station, the date of birth, date of entry into service, insurance, the staff, board examiner's certificate number, annual, weekly and daily rate, and remarks. That's the kind of thing you'll find in records A to Z, and in the reading room you can have a look. So to sum up, this topic is extremely big. There's no way to make it simple or easy. So what I've done today is I've tried to give you a sense of, well, I know how to do that. And then once you know how to do that, you can actually find whatever pathway you want to occupation records. And on this page, you've got a sort of a summary. From indexes online, you've got a large number of records there, and of course that will change over time. In professions and occupations, there's a large number of guides for different occupations. Records A to Z, a lot of those will link to similar things because as you drill down, you can go from one thing to the next. But in records A to Z, there's a wide range of records there. And at the moment, collection search, you're going to see company records, doctors' photographs, and also businesses have been added as well. But above all, if there's any confusion when it comes to this topic today, I recommend that you talk to an archivist. Our goal really is, our role is really to guide you. So if you have a sense of what you want and what you know, we can then say, well, what you need to, what you can look into to make that happen, and we can make it a reality for you, because we understand the collection and we try and match it to what you want. And today, I hope it's the first step for you in occupation records. If it's not, I hope I've given you ideas that you didn't realize existed. And if in doubt, go back to Records A to Z and indexes online, and you can drill down to all of today's topic.